The third story, the third writer, is Voltaire. And this is where the plot thickens, I think, for philosophers. How many of you have read the Candide? Yeah. Okay. And have you heard of the Candide? You've heard of Voltaire? France? Voltaire writes the Candide. He writes this in 1755. It's a very skinny little book, and it's good fun to actually read this book. Voltaire is one of the Enlightenment thinkers, of course. Voltaire actually comes down to us in the literature as an atheist, as being profoundly against the church, specifically the Catholic Church. The banner expression that's always tacked on Voltaire is "écraser la femme," so crush the bitch. And what he's talking about is, of course, the Catholic Church, because his idea is that the Catholic Church has so perverted men from their natural way of being that they no longer know how to act well. Right? Okay, so, but this is Voltaire. I'm not sure at this point that that's actually, I know, yes, he did say that, but whether that's a fair interpretation at this point, I'm having to rethink that. Because of this. In 1755, there was a great earthquake in Lisbon, in Portugal. About 15,000 people are killed in the space of 10 minutes and 30 churches destroyed. It was the Toussaint. How do we say Toussaint? It was All Saints. Do you know All Saints? It was All Saints Day. We would call this Halloween. Right? So October 31st is actually a Catholic holiday. So these people are in churches. About 30 churches are destroyed in the space of 6 minutes, 15,000 people dead. And Voltaire writes this scathing article about this because he cannot understand why God would allow such a thing to happen. And so for Voltaire, his idea is that God has somehow abandoned the world because God would not even protect his own faithful in churches on a holy day. And he's kind of like, what's that all about? What good is God if he's not going to do that? And so it's that re-questioning of ourselves in terms of religion. And so Voltaire remains eternally dissatisfied with respect to that particular question. And he will write the Candide. Now, Candide is kind of an interesting story. It's a story about a young fella. Candide means naive. Okay, he's a kid. He doesn't know anything, and the whole story is going to be episodic literature. Have you ever studied literature? Have you ever read books? Okay, so Don Quixote. Remember Cervantes is going to. This is episodic literature. In other words, it's constructed around episodes, right? So this is truly episodic literature. 1755 is a date. In which Candide will go through from event to event to event, and you have two guides in his life. Guide number one is going to be the good Dr. Pangloss, and Pangloss means all tongues, okay, or all languages. His idea is that the world, he's a philosopher, predictably, right? That the world is the best of all possible places, right? It's his philosophy. He's actually picking this up from a German. So this is Voltaire saying to this German guy, Leibniz, that nah, you're on drugs. Okay, that doesn't work. That's completely stupid as a philosopher. So Pangloss is there to collect this young Candide and say, my man, everything that happens to you, all these various episodes that happen to you, are for the good. Okay, and the logic is this: God is good. God created the world. Therefore, he created the world that is good. And in fact, he created the world that is, in fact, the best of all possible worlds. Because he would not have created a lesser world. You see how that reasoning is going to happen? Okay, so now Candide is going to go through his early life, interpreting all of these events that are going to occur to him in the light of that philosophy. Okay? He leaves, for example, when he's very, very young, and he's still in the chateau of the great baron, and he's a young fella. So when he's baron, he's a dog near to death. When he's seconded into the army of the king of the Bulgarians, when this happens and that happens and the next thing, things that we would consider normally quite, like yuck. Okay, that was bad. Okay, he has to now interpret and try to figure out how they're good. Well, he goes through the episodes of his life. He ends up in South America in this place called El Dorado. Right? El Dorado is paradise on earth. He has all the riches in the world. It's this hidden little place, right? He doesn't know how he got into it. It was quite by accident, like what happens in the Tarzan movies, right? It was quite by accident that he actually ended up in there. And there are diamonds and there's gold and things like this just laying in the street, and he's busy picking things up, right? And nobody's picking things up because everybody has those things. So they are not valued in that society, but they are valued in the world where he comes from. Okay, so he just puts them back down because these people, they have that kind of stuff, so they're not looking at it. And he thinks, man, I just have everything that the world has to give me here. And then he decides that he's not happy. Because he says, how can I be happy? I need poor people in order for me to be happy about how rich I am. Okay? So what we have in this perfect paradise where Candide finds himself is that he is unhappy in this perfect paradise. Because you want to measure yourself against this person. So Voltaire is kind of telling us a story about an eternal discontent that happens to be the story of every man. Okay, this is Candide. Candide is all of us. Now, Candide loads up some sheep. He escapes from, loads up some sheep full of gold, and he's busy thinking, how this is going to look for him in Europe. He's going to come back to Europe. He's going to be wealthy. He's going to be wealthy beyond imagination. Everybody's going to see him. He's going to go to the opera, to the theater. He's going to have fine clothes. He's going to have a great house, beautiful horses, all these kind of wonderful. And of course, there was a shipwreck, right? And everything goes away, right? But I think one sheep gets out, so he does have some little wealth when he gets back. On that boat, he meets a second philosopher. Okay, it's like saying that philosophers are everywhere, right? It's like cockroaches. Okay, so the second philosopher, his name is Martin, and Martin's idea is this. Remember Pangloss? Remember the first philosopher? Do you remember him? What was his philosophy? It's the best of all possible worlds. Predictably, then Martin is going to be, no man, this is all crap. Okay, so you can see that happening, right? So everything that Candide has interpreted up to this point, Martin tells him, no man, you got that wrong, it's all crap. And it's going to keep happening like this, and it's all going to be crap. Right? And so Candide is kind of hither and yon. He said, it's all good, it's all crap. It's all good, it's all crap. And he doesn't know where he stands in terms of these philosophers, which is pretty normal. So, that being said, he gets back home, and he's always between these two philosophical points of view, which you might translate as optimism and pessimism. Okay? So when he gets home, he is reunited with his long-lost love, the first kiss. Remember Cunigond way back then? She's been raped by 500 Bulgars, although Voltaire makes it clear that she was not opposed to the 500. Okay, so he develops a character for her, which is really not flattering. And the whole story of her life has really been the uglification of Cunigond. Okay, because in his mind, he remembered her as the flowering young virgin of young love. And in fact, she turns out to be a slut. Okay? Yeah, okay. So that's Voltaire. We don't care about that. He gets there, he's reunited with this woman who has become a complete and total impossible human being to live with. Okay? But he's nonetheless reunited, and he is faithful to his love. Now, the end of the story that Voltaire tells us is that Candide is going to push away Pangloss, Dr. Pangloss, he's going to push away this kind of optimism, which is a philosophical interpretation about reality, okay, that it is all good. He is equally going to push away Martin and that philosophy of pessimism to say that it's all crap. And this is the conclusion that Voltaire is going to leave us with, that Candide is going to buy a little piece of land, and he's going to mend or mind or take care of his own little garden. That's the story. What do you do with a story like that? Okay? Traditionally, this story is interpreted as being anti-philosophical. That is to say that philosophers really have no contribution to make to anything. Okay? Because whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, quite frankly, you were talking nonsense, and it is no value to your living. And that your living should be to tend to your business, to do the thing that is in front of you to do. Right? What's the problem with that interpretation?
Selfishness.
Go ahead.
Selfishness.
I heard. Go ahead.
So if you only mind your own business, then you don't take responsibility for those around you.
That's also true, isn't it? But that's a criticism of the story, but not necessarily of the interpretation of the story.
Maybe that you always need a certain worldview, so it's kind of you can't put philosophy, can't neglect it. Everyone has a philosophy in life, so you can't say all of philosophy is rubbish, because then you kind of have to fight against yourself.
Can you support that with anything that I just said about the Candide?
Well, I would say that his worldview is determined by his philosophy. So, and he acts upon what he thinks. So, I guess it kind of shows very critically how crucial it is to have the right set of values and insights.
This is not from the inside of the story of the Candide, because the Candide is precisely turn your brain off. And frankly, the philosophers are out to lunch. Right? We don't mess with them, and we just kind of do the little job that comes to us in our lives. Okay? So I'm not sure, you're not entirely there, but you're a little the way there. Jules.
No, Voltaire is a philosopher, so...
That's precisely the problem. What is Voltaire, as a philosopher, doing? Is Voltaire actually making a statement that is anti-philosophical? I don't think so. That's the problem with the interpretation. Okay? So we have in the person of Candide. Do you remember the name of this lecture, by the way? Did any of you ever know the name of this lecture? Yeah. The name of this lecture is The First Flower Child and the Citizen Philosopher. The first flower child is, of course, going to be... Huh?
Is it Tina Goldman?
It's Candide.
Oh, Candide.
Candide is minding his own flowers. He's taking care of his own garden. So he's our first flower child. Do you know the expression flower children? The hippies in America in the 60s. Have you heard of America? That way? Okay, so in the 60s, which is well before you were born, there were a bunch of hippies, long hair, dope smoking folks. Okay, that's those guys. Okay, social liberty, freedom, break away from society kind of stuff. Okay, I think that Voltaire creates in Candide the model of that. Okay, that we move back to the agricultural thing. In other words, we move back toward being, to your point, like the Cyclops. We moved back into an agricultural community, and not a community, but well, he did have a little community around him, right? Cunigonde, who was a real right cow, right? Okay, so he did, but there was no notion of society in his garden. It was really him minding his own business. So there is that kind of a thing happening here. So he's our first flower child, I think. And then we have a citizen philosopher, which is, as Jules points out, Voltaire himself. Okay, because remember, there is no professional philosopher in France. There are intellectuals, and there's the salon, which is where public intellectual stuff took place, where thinkers met, or people who wrote philosophically minded things, they met and they chatted in societies like this.